Hey everybody. So we wanted to talk about how to work with maps with your internal community stuff. And this is just going to be probably the easiest way for us to do it right now, rather than trying to type everything out. One of the things that I don't think we've conveyed is the difference between just drawing something versus actually quote unquote doing it. And so let's say you're working with a map and you want to work on communication. So you have person A and person B and person C, and you normally would have communication like this, let's say. It's a sorry drawing. So you have communication between A and C both ways. You have communication between B and C one way. And you want to try to establish communication between A and B. Drawing the line isn't enough, right? So you draw a line. That's not going to be enough. Somewhere in your inner world, there's some kind of effort that has to go into it. There's, it's more than just putting text on a screen or on a piece of paper. What that effort looks like in your system is going to depend on how your system operates and what y'all need to do in order to make internal changes. So it might include visualizing things, expending internal energy, or willing, which is kind of, I don't know what else to call it, kind of a mental force or a mental determination kind of thing. Just like, we are doing this with intention, we're going to put this communication into place, kind of mental effort. If that doesn't make sense to you, I apologize. There's some things that people do defy human English explanation. But A, B, and C, this probably isn't sufficient. Okay. I'm trying to take things that don't work well in languaging and put them into language and form. So how can we give it a real world example? So, we're having an emotional flashback, and we end up rescuing a child. We're going to use Pumpkin as our example, as if it's a real world example. So, we have Pumpkin. Whoops, we can't spell or write right now. Pumpkin. Actually, let's get the dot out of there. We don't need the dot, we got the name. Pumpkin. And we've got Buck. Poor Buck. He's our constant example. And we have Shady, who we can't really do in an appropriate color or something because, here, we'll use dark purple. So, we don't want you not able to see it. So we've got Shady. And so, Buck dives through this portal and he, this kind of an emotional flashback portal. Okay, Pumpkin's freaking out. Pumpkin is leaking anxiety all through our system, and we're having both an emotional flashback, but we also can see the memory that is the instance that Pumpkin is freaking out about, where Pumpkin is feeling abandoned. And so we have this scenario of Pumpkin and Shady having two-way communication between them. And Buck dives through this emotional portal, and now he's in a hallway in a past memory So he's in the there and then, but he's attached to the present and the here and now. And he has visual, he can see Pumpkin. And he makes a communication to Pumpkin and says, "Would you like to come with me?" Pumpkin gives communication back. She nods or whatever she does, so she has sent a message and Buck has received it. So now we have established a two-way communication between Pumpkin and Buck. Verbal, nonverbal, doesn't matter. Who cares? It was a communication, it was received, it was accurate. That's what matters. So, Pumpkin and Buck have established communication. Pumpkin, who has communication with Shady, is now concerned that she's about to leave, but Shady is still there. So she's indicating to Buck, which succeeded. So she is kind of gesturing and kind of frantically like pulling back to the apartment door because she doesn't want to leave Shady behind. Buck gets the message. Buck goes behind the door and finds Shady there and is like, "Oh, hi. Would you like to come with me?" So there's an actual action going on here where Buck is broadcasting a message with the intent behind the message of the message being received, and these people are receiving it, if that makes sense. There is like a will behind it. There's an intention, there's a force. There's like a mental will or intention to broadcast a message and have it be received. And it is received. And so Shady is like, "Oh, okay," he doesn't say it in words, but indicates back to Buck his yes, which in this case might have been more like a ping, or a knowing, or in this case, maybe even a visual gesture that Shady has now said to Buck, "Oh, okay, I'll go with you." So you can see, like, if we take this situation, this was a visual inner world situation, but you break it down to what's going on behind the scenes is broadcast and receipt of information, and then the receipt, the listening, the catching the message, the getting the idea. Even if these people don't speak English, Buck's intention of "would you like to come with me" was not necessarily like in language per se. Anyway, so increasing communication when you're doing it on a map still has the intention and the will behind it. You can draw the lines, but the lines don't have any meaning until there's something behind the lines, if that makes sense. So you can draw the intention. In other words, you can model that you intend for these people to have the ability to talk, but until there's will behind it, nothing happens. So in order to go and get Shady, Buck hands Pumpkin off to Dreel. So now Pumpkin and Dreel have physical, inner world physical contact, if that makes any sense. And so let's say that's some kind of a communication between them. But they have not necessarily established conscious communication. So what if we said, okay, so here we are now, and this is kind of our communication situation. Pumpkin is very attached to Buck and has two-way communication with Buck. And Shady's pretty attached to Pumpkin and has some two-way communication with Buck. What if we want Dreel, who's one of our inner world parents, to have better communication with Pumpkin and or Shady? How would we go about this? Well, we could, take said dotted line. They've had contact before. They know each other exists. So, hey, what about we have some communication attempts here and see what happens? Can they talk to each other? And we would put some kind of inner world oomph behind it. Some kind of effort, some mental spoons, if you will. Maybe not a whole spoon. It might even not even take that much. So, kind of like behind the scenes, maybe Buck is like, hey, Pumpkin, remember that nice lady we handed you over to when we were rescuing you? Would you like to be able to talk to her? And so we're kind of like sending a message that has that kind of gist to it to Pumpkin. Pumpkin is like, oh yeah, I remember that lady. So she's like, sure. And we're kind of doing this real time, so so it's like, okay, let's see if we can actually do this. Like, hey, Pumpkin, you already have an attachment to somebody, but we want you to have attachment to a new person. Would this be okay? Would you be okay with talking with Drill, kind of thing? And it's kind of, maybe not in those exact words, but that's kind of like the message that we're sending. Now, the reason we're like hesitating is like now we have like, we're like reaching out like in inner world. We've been having a lot of trouble communicating for various reasons. So we're like actually doing this. Oh, and of course there's already like a two-way communication between Buck and Drill. So that already existed. So now to see the other way around. Can Pumpkin receive a message from Drill? And so basically we're reaching inward, we're finding Drill, which is a little bit hard for us right now. Normally it's not, but we're finding Drill, and it's like, okay, Drill, can you receive a message from Pumpkin, and can you send a message back to Pumpkin? So she's received the message, and now to send a message back to Pumpkin. So basically the message from Drill back to Pumpkin is that she would love to spend time with Pumpkin, and I think Pumpkin is definitely receiving that. Okay, so we're actually mapping it and doing it at the same time. And we could map the intention to do it eventually. So, like, eventually we want Drill and Shady also to have direct contact. But we could plan it and not necessarily do it right now if we wanted to. So that would be like, and I'm just, right now I'm using the arrowheads to indicate that it's actually been established, right? So right now it's just showing an intention, and we can work on that. So hopefully this kind of a communication-ish issue, however you draw it, isn't the point. The point is that there is actually something to do behind the drawing. Like, we're modeling the idea, but just like, you don't just draw the plans for a building and the building appears. You draw the plans for a building and you got to do something in order to make it real. There's another step, or many steps, in order to get it to be real. Either you're like calling a contractor and, paying them, like if it was external world, calling a contractor and they're going to build it, or you're going to like pick up a hammer and nails and go to the hardware store and pick up some wood, right? So there's more to it than just the drawing. The drawing is the model, but now you have actually something to do. So that would be an example of communication type of inner work and things that you might do. Now for us, communication comes fairly easy. We already have some high levels of co-consciousness. Pumpkin's a passenger, and so is Shady. Now that they're not in the there and then, and they're not stowaways anymore, now they're passengers, where Drill and Buck are crew. They're officers. Well, something like. Drill's an officer, Buck is an officer and rebel. But that's beside the point. So, for us, this comes fairly easy. This might take more work for other people, but it's like draw the lines with the intention of it actually happening, with the doingness behind it. And sometimes it happens subconsciously, but there's still some kind of mental effort in it. Just drawing the lines won't make it happen. So then there's lowering inner world boundaries, which can be fun. So again, it's an as inside so outside type of thing. So let's find some kind of boundary here. I don't even know if you can see that. We'll draw something in the middle of it to make it more visible. Does this work? Yeah, there we go. Alright, we used a highlighter. And the highlighter is not so very dark. Okay. Or light, or whatever you want to call it. So, we have a boundary in our system. Do we? Yes, we do. Okay. Making sure. So, on this side we have, our fronters, like officers, crew, passengers, and here we have, we're not sure, and possibly magpie. And do we have any other named people out there in the wilderness? Maybe Sheena. So we may have others, right? So we have this boundary. This would be the there and then versus the here and now. Just as an example of what that boundary could be. And then we would have to perhaps change this. Let's change it. That's interesting. Doesn't erase the highlighter. Oh, maybe it will if we choose a different type of eraser. There we go. So we are going to change it to having a door. And I think we want the door to unlock on both sides. Actually, let's move this. And show that it's a two-way door. It opens both ways. And so we're doing this with intention again. So behind this, it's not just words on a piece of paper. This is an actual barrier in our system. We have actually made a door in, or we're in the process of making a door. We can kind of feel things happening. But when we do this with intention to actually have it happen, then it's kind of, it's going to be in progress possibly for a bit. It's almost like there's invisible crew members going to take care of it or something. We did this with the spaceship renovation of our system. So we went from an apartment to a spaceship. We could feel things rearranging, like walls moving and stuff. It was very weird. So this is a wall we don't usually pay much attention to, but it is definitely, I wouldn't call it an inner world wall. It's a consciousness wall. It's it's not physically represented in our inner world, but it's there. So this is an interesting one. So that's lowering an inner world boundary. Okay, connections and closeness. There's a bunch of ways we might do that. Are there people in here that we want to be closer to each other? Otherwise, we should use like third-party abstract ideas and not our own head, lest we make too many changes all at once. Okay. We've been literally having some issues with star fronting. And one of the interesting things is, so, like, we basically have an inner world kind of shaped like that at the moment, basically. And front is here. Now, star is in their quarters somewhere all the way back there, and then there's, like, basically a bunch of quarters, sections. Star is almost all the way back there. I'm trying to think. There are people, see, there's like very much logic behind the positionings and the neighborings in this. So is there a way to help star front more if there's some kind of an internal... See, one of the things we did to try and help is we installed this is like more than one level. So we installed a tram system around here because it's very big now. We made it much bigger. So there's now a tram system to transport people. But that may not be enough. So maybe one of the things we could do is like a interface. Kind of like if they were going to Zoom or something, like maybe they could Zoom conference to front. So here we are, we're actually puzzling out and thinking about modeling and so on a potential solution to an inner world connection / closeness issue. Star's too far from front. We would like her to front more often, and she's an officer, but she's been kind of, I don't know, semi-retired or something, and or something like that, working her own shit out. And so it's like, well, how could she front more often? We already put in the tram system. She's obviously not really using it. So maybe if she didn't have to leave her quarters and could still interface with front. So is there a way that we could have somebody still in their quarters interface with front? Well, there's teleporters, or we could build in, a direct interface in their quarters that like mirrors front or connects them to front. So in this case, like, can there be a remote control? Or like maybe every section would have their own potential to like interface with the front from their quarters. I don't know how else to put it. So if you watch like some of the Star Trek, I forget which series it was. Might have been Enterprise. They had to make a second bridge deeper into the ship, like in the fuel nacelles or something, in a causeway. So they made another bridge that would override front, their bridge in front, and allow them to control the ship from somewhere else in the ship. So it could be like modeled after that, where like Star can take front without having to leave their subsystem / quarters. That would be interesting. So we're thinking about that. So that's on the table. We're not actually implementing that yet. And then, trust issues. How would we work out trust issues in kind of a mapping paradigm? Well, kind of like the boundary issue we worked on before, or the closest issue, like figuring out what is the problem. So there's some various types of problems with trust. One of them is being trustworthy. Like if you actually have traits that are putting somebody off of trusting you, how can you be more trustworthy? And then, of course, there's you actually did breach trust, not that you just seem like you will, that you actually did do something, and how can you make that up and fix that situation? Some issues in there could involve things that might be able to be mapped. So, like we were talking about values maps and role maps and so on, like maybe a trust map, like who trusts who, how can they work on it, or the traits of trust and who has them. So, how do you be trustworthy? And we go through that. We'll put a link. We have a podcast on being trustworthy, basically, kind of. So one of the things is trusting others. So one way to model that you're trustworthy is by trusting others. Your integrity, which we kind of define as being where you do the right thing even when no one's watching. They're similar to honesty. It's not the same thing, but they're similar. Being reliable. Like showing up when you say you will. That's also dependable. Or so similar as to not necessarily be something that needs to be defined separately. Reliable, dependable, compassionate. Which is similar to, but not the same as empathetic. And so on. So you can map out the traits and then figure out whether or not the person or persons involved are fulfilling those traits and which ones need to be worked on. What else? How else could you do it? I don't know. Mostly we would be like, here's a whole list of TED Talks that'll help you work on trustworthiness or something like that. Like, here's a bunch of the things that go into being trustworthy. But what will actually get the other party to initiate trust? And that's one of the reasons trusting is here too, is you don't necessarily magically build trust. Sometimes there's a certain amount of trust that you develop over time by starting out with trusting something like a lower level of risk and testing. There we go, testing. Testing trust. Because, because like we were saying, trust isn't something that just comes to people like instantaneously. It's something that builds over time. So it would be testing and then, then trusting and then testing again and trusting more. So it would keep building. And as you know, it keeps going back and forth until there's more and more trust, if that makes sense. And as long as all these other traits stay reliable or increase, rather than decrease, then this testing and trusting can continue to happen over time. So that's where the building is. This is the building. Building trust. Yep, basically something like that. Okay. And the note that we made on trust issues is to get enthusiastic consent. By which we mean that you want to get to the point where people are enthusiastic about whatever it is that you need the trust for. Like, not just like, I guess, you don't want that. You want like, oh yeah, I trust you. So you basically want to get to the point of enthusiastic consent regarding trust. So some things we have committees for. So let's say there's the Plural Positivity World Conference. We can't spell right now. So committees. Or overall, this would be like our life work. Our life's work committees. There we go. So we have like a PPWC subcommittee. We have a plurality resource subcommittee, like working on specific classes and so on. So we have like all of these different planning committees that will work on projects together. PPWC might be, they're going to be a lot of the same people. Puck, Drill, Moonlight. Who else is working on PPWC this year? Well, whatever. Where there may be classes on plurality resource on completely different topics. Let's say Tel Ray wants to do a writing while plural class, or Frank wants to do something about art and drawing, so they might participate there, and things like that. Like, you can plan out like sections of life stuff and who works on it. Okay, that's good enough for this video, I think. So those are some ways to work on internal community stuff regarding using maps and actually making stuff happen. Now, our committees, they take place inner world, usually in the background. Like, we don't have conscious memory of what goes on during the committees. All we know is that we give them an idea. Okay, you guys need to work on what our presentations will be for Plural Positivity World Conference, and we'll get back to you in a week. So they go off and they start doing whatever they do, and then in a week we sit down and like, okay, so debriefing, what'd you guys come up with? And they'll give us like 3 or 4 ideas and be like, okay, these are the ones that seem the most likely that we would do. 3 or 4 ideas, or oh yeah, we needed some body time to go and look things up in this book or that book. We had some ideas written down last year. We remembered them while we were in committee. Let's go and see what we wrote in those books and go over those. It's like, okay, so like eventually we get around to body time with that subcommittee and get the debriefing or do body type work with it, like brainstorming and writing things down or stuff like that. But they'll have already put some time and effort into it on their end. Yeah, so hopefully this is helpful. You know, we're just drawing very simple maps because we're kind of not physically doing very well. So, and not mentally doing very well either. So we're just like giving bare bones ideas, but please feel free to design things however works for you guys, of course, and use whatever software you want. We wanted to convey the idea behind some of these types of maps, and writing it all out would have been laborious and taken us a lot of time. So we wanted to do the picture is worth 1,000 words thing if we could. So hopefully this was helpful, and y'all can take this and run with it. Thank you very much.